Hi, my name is Charmy. At my mother's funeral, my sister gave a beautiful speech about legacy and family, while she'd already changed the locks on the condo my mom left behind. Not just any condo, a $450 million estate filled with decades of art, memory, and history. And she told the doorman, I was no longer family. But here's what she didn't know. My mother had already made her decision, and it wasn't the one Selena expected. How did I go from erased to entrusted? Why did my mother choose the daughter she barely mentioned in public over the one who built her brand off our last name? And what exactly was locked behind that sealed door for so long? You might think this story ends in court. It doesn't. It ends with a painting that was never finished. But maybe that was the point. I thought I was prepared. I'd gone over it 100 times in my head. What I'd wear, how I'd carry myself, how I'd stay silent. Not invisible, just silent. But when I stepped into the main chapel at St. Jude's that morning, I knew within seconds that my preparation was no match for the reality I was about to face. The first thing I saw was the program. Stacked neatly in gold-embossed holders by the entrance, they were designed like a museum pamphlet, polished, curated, soulless. I picked one up, fingers trembling not from grief, but from something colder. On the back page, beneath the words, "In loving memory of Odessa Durant," there were 3 names listed under immediate family: Selena Harlow, Paul Harlow, Cassandra Harlow. My name wasn't there. I stared at it for a moment too long. A woman behind me, someone I didn't recognize, tapped my shoulder and whispered, "Are you family or press?" I didn't answer. I just smiled and stepped aside. Inside, the chapel looked like a set piece. White roses everywhere. A giant photo of Mom, the one from her Architectural Digest cover, where she looked like she was posing to impress an investor, not building a home. Selena stood near the altar, shaking hands, smiling through tears. She always had a gift for the camera. Even without one around, she performed. I found a seat near the side aisle. Not with the family. Apparently, I wasn't part of that anymore. People filed in. The pianist played something somber and expensive-sounding. When the service began, Selena stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and delivered a speech so polished it might have been rehearsed with a teleprompter. She was a mother, a visionary, and the reason I became the woman I am today, Selena said, pausing just enough for effect. Everything I am, I owe to her, and I will carry on her work, her home, and her values. There it was again. Her home. I didn't flinch, didn't cry. I didn't even shift in my seat. But I felt every word like it had been thrown at me on purpose. After the service, guests flowed into the reception hall like water seeking lower ground. Selena greeted each of them as if she were the widow, not the daughter. I waited by the far table, close to the servers. Most of them didn't know me. A few gave me polite nods, the kind you give a woman who looks like she doesn't quite belong. "Is that Charmy?" someone whispered, not low enough. "I thought she lived out west now. Isn't she the artist?" I didn't bother correcting them. There was no point. When people erase you from the story, they don't want the truth. They want silence. After an hour of polite stares, and even politer avoidance, I slipped out. I told myself I needed air. What I needed was to remember I wasn't crazy. So I went to the only place that still felt like my mother, her condo. The drive uptown was short but heavy. Every block pulled me deeper into something I couldn't quite name. I wasn't going to make a scene. I just wanted to see her piano, the sketches she used to leave on the side table, maybe even the shawl she wore when she had her tea by the window. When I pulled up to the building, the doorman was new. Young, clean-shaven, trying too hard to look serious. "Good evening, ma'am," he said. "Are you here to see someone?" I paused, swallowing the awkwardness. "I'm here for 31A, Odessa Durant's residence." He typed something into the screen, blinked, then looked up. "I'm sorry, I can't let you through. The access authorization was changed this morning." I pulled out my keycard, swiped it. Read, again, read. There must be a mistake. He glanced back at the monitor. It says the unit is under restricted access. I was told not to permit anyone not pre-cleared. Ms. Harlow was very specific. Ms. Harlow, not Ms. Durant, not even your sister. I stood there for a second, trying to decide if I should argue, explain, plead. But something inside me froze. Not from fear, from clarity. She said you'd try to come back, the doorman added, softer now. And that you were no longer family. I stepped back, nodding slowly. My mother's name was on that building's deed, not Selena's, but I wasn't going to fight that battle in a lobby. I turned without a word, walked back to my car. The sky had gone heavy, draped in early dusk. As I opened the door, a single raindrop hit the windshield. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic. It was just quiet. And I knew, in that moment, I was no longer grieving my mother. I was grieving something else, something I hadn't dared name. So I went back, not to the party, but to the only place where I could still see my mother's face the way it used to be. I drove to the edge of Central Park and parked, stayed in the car with the engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The city kept moving around me, horns, dogs, laughter from a bar 2 streets away. And yet I felt like I was sitting inside a glass case. 2 days passed. I stayed mostly silent, replying to messages with one-word texts, brushing off condolences with thank you emojis. I kept thinking maybe this would pass, that maybe Selena would call, say it had been a clerical mistake, that she had meant to add my name to the program, that the building lockout had been an admin error. But the call never came. Instead, an invite showed up, not directly to me, but through a mutual friend, Daniel Kim, who used to help Mom curate her gallery installations. "Thought you should see this," his text read. Attached was a photo of a cream and gold Evite, an intimate evening honoring the life and legacy of Odessa Durant, hosted by her daughter, Selena Harlow. Her daughter, not daughters, just her. I stared at the screen, rereading that line like I was waiting for it to change. Daniel followed up with, "I assumed you'd be there, but if you weren't told, that's really messed up." "Yeah," I texted back. "It is." I didn't plan to go, but by noon the next day, I was standing in front of Selena's condo building in Midtown, staring up at the glass facade. The entrance was flanked with candles and orchids. It looked more like a product launch than a memorial, and maybe that's exactly what it was. I walked in without hesitation. The doorman this time didn't stop me, probably assuming anyone who looked this pissed off must have been on the list. Inside, the space was glowing in soft amber light. String quartet in the corner, champagne being passed around by caterers in matching black masks. And people, lots of them, art donors, board members from the design council, Mom's old friends, many of whom hadn't seen her in years, but now clutched flutes of sparkling rosé like they were part of her final chapter. I stood by the corner of the main hall, watching. Photos were arranged on linen-draped tables, snapshots of Mom's career, her travel abroad, the opening of her 3rd gallery. In every one, Selena was there, polished and centered. I wasn't in a single frame. Not even the family Christmas photo I remembered vividly, because I took it. One curator, an older woman with a loud scarf, leaned in beside me and asked, "Oh, are you one of the staff? I adore the lighting in here." I gave her a flat smile and turned away. I wasn't going to explain myself to someone who couldn't even guess I might be family. I found a spot near the hallway exit. I didn't mingle, didn't drink, just observed. Selena walked into the center of the room, dressed in deep navy, subtle but expensive. She clinked her glass lightly with the stem of a fork, waited for the murmur to quiet, then began. "Thank you all for coming tonight. It means more to me than you know. My mother wasn't just a force in architecture. She was a mentor, a friend, the one who shaped everything I am. I remember her telling me, 'Selena, legacy isn't about property, it's about purpose.' And I plan to carry her purpose forward in every corner of this city she loved." Polite applause followed. I stood still, arms crossed, jaw set. She named people to thank, cousins, old colleagues, even her ex-husband for supporting her vision. Not once did my name cross her lips. It didn't need to. I wasn't part of this script. But what burned more wasn't being left out. It was the precision of it. The way every image had been cropped, every detail smoothed out, history rewritten while the body was barely cold. As the crowd applauded again, I noticed something strange. Selena's speech notes had a timestamp, printed 3 days ago. That meant she wrote this before the funeral, before anyone else had even started grieving. While I was still trying to decide what dress to wear that wouldn't feel performative, I left before dessert, slipped past a waiter holding a tray of bite-sized cheesecakes, past 2 interns discussing how iconic the gallery wall looked, and out into the night. On my way out, I passed a framed photograph in the hallway. My mother, cutting the ribbon at her first gallery opening. Selena beside her, holding the scissors. I stopped. I remembered that day. I remembered standing on the other side of my mother, holding her left hand while she laughed. But in the photo here, that side was cropped. Deliberately. If you're not in the picture, they assume you were never there. I didn't go home after the event. I couldn't. I ended up at a diner near East 74th and just sat there, staring at a mug of untouched coffee that kept getting refilled by a waitress who clearly pitied me. She didn't ask questions, just kept pouring, like she knew I needed the silence more than the caffeine. By the time I left, the city was already wrapped in night. I walked aimlessly until I found myself back near the Durant building. I hadn't planned to come here, not again. But there I was, outside the lobby where 2 nights ago I had been denied like a stranger at someone else's doorstep. This time, I came prepared. I had called ahead under a different name and booked a visitor slot to the building, pretending to be a freelance designer reviewing the building's private art collection. It was a stretch, but money talks. And it turned out, so did my mother's last name. When it was convenient for them. The lobby was quiet. The new doorman looked up from his tablet but didn't say much. I nodded politely, signed in as C. Moore, and headed toward the elevator like I belonged. When the doors opened on the 31st floor, I stepped into a hallway that had once been filled with scent. Lavender, faint wood polish, the warmth of tea steeped too long. Now it smelled like citrus cleaner and new carpet. The walls were repainted in pale gray, the kind you find in high-end staging brochures. Gone were the textured wallpapers Mom had picked out after her trip to Florence. The art was gone too, replaced with impersonal, oversized prints of abstract shapes that said nothing and meant even less. The condo had been gutted. Not physically, perhaps, but spiritually? It was hollow. I stood in the foyer longer than I meant to. It felt wrong to walk further in shoes, but the rug she used to ask guests to step on before removing their footwear was missing too. So I stayed where I was. Behind me, a door clicked open. A man in a sport coat walked out from the kitchen with a wine glass. He glanced at me, gave a faint smile, and before I could say anything, held out his coat. "Oh, can you hang this up for me?" he asked. I blinked. "I'm not staff," I said evenly. He raised both hands. "Sorry, you look very efficient." I didn't bother responding. He disappeared before I could figure out whether that was a compliment or an insult. Walking past the living area, I noted more changes. The bookcase that once held my mother's journals now had color-coordinated spines of fake books. Her old reading chair, the one with worn-out armrests she refused to replace, had been swapped with a velvet chaise that didn't even face the window anymore. I checked the bedroom. Her quilted bedding was gone, replaced by something sleek and glossy. The room didn't smell like her. It smelled like nothing. But the real punch came when I turned the corner and saw what had once been her sketch room. It was now a wine cellar, an actual, glass-walled, temperature-controlled wine cellar. The walls where she had pinned her ideas, clippings, scribbled floor plans, and late-night thoughts, they were gone. In their place stood racks of Merlot and Syrah, lined like trophies. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, absorbing the silence. I took one breath, then another. This wasn't accidental. This was surgical. Selena hadn't just taken over. She had replaced everything, erased everything that made it feel like home, and refitted it like a showroom. Behind me, soft footsteps approached. I turned and saw someone I vaguely recognized, an assistant who used to work with Mom in her first gallery. He paused when our eyes met. "Charmy?" he said under his breath. I nodded. He hesitated, then looked over his shoulder and said quickly, "You didn't see me, okay?" Then he walked away. That told me everything I needed to know. Selena had made it clear to everyone, whatever my connection to this place was, it was to remain unsaid. But there was one more space I hadn't checked. At the far end of the hallway, past the newly framed mirror and the artificial orchid arrangement, was the old writing room. My mother's sacred space. She used to call it her quiet engine. It was where ideas lived before they became blueprints. The door was locked, not shut, locked, with a digital keypad I hadn't seen before. I was about to lean in, check the frame, when a voice from down the hall startled me. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to leave that room alone." It was one of the building's staff, dressed in maintenance gear. "Who authorized it to be locked?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The current occupant said it was to remain sealed." "Did they say why?" He shrugged. "Didn't ask, just followed the order." I looked back at the door, stood there for several seconds. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," I said quietly. "I didn't say you were, but some rooms aren't for guests." I smiled thinly. "Some rooms aren't supposed to be forgotten either." He didn't reply. As I turned to leave, something inside me shifted. I didn't press the issue. I didn't ask for a key. I didn't threaten legal action. But I made a silent note. This wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Because if there's a door you're not supposed to open, it's probably because someone's hiding what you're meant to find. I left the building with my heels echoing down the marble hallway, passing the front desk without making eye contact. Outside, the sidewalk was still damp from a light morning drizzle. I didn't call a cab. I needed the walk, a long one. I looped past Madison, then cut through Park, keeping my head down while the city carried on like nothing had happened. That night, I barely slept. I kept going back to the sealed room. The way the door stood untouched, guarded by a password and silence. What was she hiding? Or, what had been hidden from me? The next morning, I got a message from Rhea Mencken, an old friend of my mother's, someone she'd mentored back when she was building her first gallery. Rhea had always been quiet but observant. We hadn't spoken in years. Her message simply said, "Can we meet? There's something you need to see. Odessa asked me to hold it for you." We met at a small cafe tucked away behind a florist in Midtown. It smelled like lavender and roasted beans, and for a second, I imagined my mother sitting across from me, sketchbook open, stirring her tea with the wrong end of the spoon. Rhea arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a shawl I instantly recognized. My mother's. She didn't say anything about it, just handed me a small flash drive wrapped in tissue. "She sent this to me 2 days before she passed," Rhea said quietly. "Told me not to deliver it until you came looking. Until you were ready." I held it in my hand for a moment. "Ready for what?" Rhea sighed. "For the kind of truth you don't find in a will." Later that afternoon, I opened the file on my laptop. It was encrypted, password protected. But the answer came to me in an instant. My mother's old sketch title from her final solo show, Weightless Truths. It opened. There were no legal documents, no scans of property deeds or banking statements, just a single email, sent directly from her personal address, dated 4 days before the stroke. "Charmy, if you're reading this, it means you've been pushed out farther than I hoped you would. I've watched your sister rewrite more than just facts. She's rewriting meaning, And I'm sorry, I let it happen too long. But listen carefully. The key to all this isn't in court documents or gallery plaques. It's in values, ethics. You always understood that better than the rest of us. That's why this place was never about ownership. It was about stewardship, about trust. I read it twice. Then, once more, aloud, to the empty room. There was no vengeance in her tone, no bitterness, just clarity. And suddenly, I felt still. I stopped trying to be included. I no longer needed a chair at Selena's table. I had my own. And I had the truth. 2 days later, I received an invitation to a family gathering hosted by the Hastings cousins. I was surprised to see my name spelled correctly for once. It was labeled a tribute dinner, meant to honor Mom in a more intimate setting. I debated going, but something in me said I needed to show up. Not for them, but to observe. The gathering was held in a brownstone just off Lexington. When I arrived, Selena was already there, perfectly composed, surrounded by familiar faces. Everyone looked up when I entered. A few smiles. A few stares. One person I didn't recognize even asked if I was the one from Portland. As the dinner progressed, a slideshow of Mom's life played on the screen above the fireplace. Pictures of her early years, her gallery openings, ribbon cuttings, award nights, and of course, photo after photo of Selena by her side. None of me. Not a single one. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, trying to decide if this was anger or just deep fatigue. Then one of my aunts stood up, glass in hand, and said, "We all know Odessa was strong-willed, but let's be honest. Selena was the one who stayed, the one who held her hand at the end. Some of us disappeared when she needed us most." I felt my stomach tighten. My cousin Jordan leaned in. "You were always the artistic one," he whispered. "But fragile, you know what I mean." I didn't reply. I just reached for my coat and stood up. No one stopped me. In the hallway, I took out my phone and opened the email again. My finger hovered over the bottom of the screen. That's when I noticed it. There was a scroll bar. A second page. I hadn't seen it before. "If they ever turn on you, don't fight them in the room. That's not where truth wins. It wins in stillness, in evidence. Go back to the source. You'll find everything you need where I left it. I made sure of it." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I stepped out into the evening air. The truth wasn't in that room, but I knew exactly where it was. I didn't sleep that night, not even a little. My mother's words kept looping in my head, like a code I couldn't crack, a riddle that pulsed just beneath my skin. Go back to the source. It echoed in the silence of my apartment long after the city outside had gone to bed. At 7:12 the next morning, I stood outside a building I hadn't visited since my 20s. Brick facade, third-floor office, a small bronze plaque that read, "Franklin Givens, Estate Law." The doorman looked older. He recognized me. Barely. "Still look like Odessa," he said quietly, holding the door open. I nodded, but didn't reply. Inside, the elevator creaked the way it always had. I remembered being 12, sitting in that office beside my mother, swinging my legs while she signed something I wasn't allowed to understand. She had told me then, sometimes a signature says more than words. Franklin met me in the hallway. He hadn't aged much, still had the same houndstooth blazer, the same way of folding his hands like a funeral director preparing bad news. But when he saw me, he smiled. Not pity, not concern. Recognition. "Charmy," he said, extending a hand. "I was wondering how long it would take." "Is that so?" I asked, stepping into the office. He motioned for me to sit. There were no pleasantries. He walked over to the filing cabinet, pulled out a thick red folder, and placed it gently on the table between us. "Your mother asked me to wait," he said. "She made it clear this file was to be opened only if and when you came on your own. No one was to push you." He slid it forward. I opened it. Inside were pages, some typed, some handwritten. On top was a notarized document titled Durant Family Living Trust, Art and Property Addendum. My name was the only beneficiary listed under the Durant penthouse. Not Durant sisters, not equal heirs, just me. Selena knows nothing about this? I asked. Franklin shook his head. She assumes the condo was transferred into her name because of a draft she saw years ago. Your mother never finalized that one. She changed everything 6 months before she passed. I skimmed the paperwork. It wasn't just ownership, it was structure. A trust for public arts outreach. A clause that the property be protected, preserved, not gutted for resale or commercial use. She wanted it to become something lasting, Franklin said, not just valuable. I didn't realize I was gripping the folder until he laid a hand on it. There's more, he said. Something personal. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small USB drive. He plugged it into his laptop, angled the screen toward me, and hit play. The screen flickered. Then she appeared. My mother, Odessa Durant, seated in her reading chair, wrapped in a blanket I hadn't seen since her chemo days. She looked tired, but her eyes were steady, sharp. If you're watching this, Charmy, she began, then I didn't get to tell you in person, and that's my greatest regret. Not because I doubt what I've done, but because I know what Selena will make you feel. She paused, took a breath. I didn't choose you because you're the better daughter. I chose you because you never asked for anything, and that's how I knew you wouldn't waste what mattered. Her voice was even, controlled. You didn't inherit this place. You were entrusted with it. And if your sister tries to tear it apart, remind her this home was never built for applause. It was built for meaning. The screen went black. I said nothing. Franklin handed me a paper slip. A meeting confirmation with the property board, scheduled for the next morning. I didn't remember asking him to set it up, but maybe he knew me better than I thought. I assume you'll need to bring that notice with you too, he said, lifting another document. I took it. It was a violation report, filed against the Durant condo unit, unauthorized structural modifications, signed off by 1S Harlow. The kitchen demo, the wine cellar conversion, the removal of the archive walls, all listed. All on record. Selena hadn't just tried to rewrite the story, she'd left a paper trail while doing it. I stood up, gathered the file, the flash drive, and the notice. Franklin didn't walk me to the door. He didn't need to. As I stepped into the hallway, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. Finally. Selena had buried the past in renovations, edits, silence. Tomorrow, I'd start digging. One signature at a time. The next morning came without fanfare. No glowing sunrise, no cinematic breeze through the window, just the ticking of my kitchen clock, too loud in the silence. I got dressed in dark navy slacks, a simple blouse, and a soft gray coat my mother once picked out for me. I didn't wear it often, but that morning I needed something of hers on me, even if it was just the lining brushing my wrists. I arrived 15 minutes early to the board meeting. The condo's private lounge had been converted into a temporary hearing room, sleek chairs, a long walnut table, water pitchers that no one touched. Outside the glass doors, I noticed 2 people with press badges hovering quietly in the hallway. One carried a small video camera. They weren't live, not yet, but they were waiting. Inside, 3 board members sat reviewing folders. Their expressions were practiced, neither friendly nor cold. They had the weary neutrality of people who'd seen too many neighbors sue over hallway paint colors. Then the door opened and Selena walked in. She wore ivory. Of course she did. A fitted dress, heels sharp enough to be weapons, and a gold pen clipped to a notepad that she probably wouldn't write in. She gave the room a warm smile, one of those expressions that suggested both innocence and inevitability. "Good morning," she said, settling into the chair at the far end of the table. "I'm happy to clarify any misunderstandings." Her attorney sat beside her. Young, expensive-looking, wearing a watch that cost more than the average car. He looked at me like I was about to waste his time. The board chair, a man named Wexler, cleared his throat. Let's begin. Ms. Durant, we've reviewed a formal complaint citing unauthorized modifications made to Unit 31A. Do you have documentation to support your claim? I reached into my bag and pulled out the file Franklin had prepared. I handed it to the assistant, who distributed copies. This is the certified trust agreement, I said calmly. Signed and notarized 6 months before my mother's passing. It names me as the sole trustee of the Durant family penthouse, including all contents and fixtures, with explicit conditions regarding structural integrity. Wexler flipped through the pages. His eyes paused on the signature page. Selina shifted, but said nothing. And, I added, I'd like to play a short recording, if you'll allow it. Wexler nodded. I pulled out a small speaker from my bag and placed it on the table. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room. Soft, tired, steady. This home, and everything in it, was meant for Charmy. Not because she's the youngest, but because she's the only one who never tried to take it. For a moment, no one moved. Selina's attorney leaned in and whispered something to her. She didn't respond. Her hands were clenched under the table. I continued. There's also an updated valuation report. As of last quarter, the condo, along with the original art, the rare design pieces, and the remaining architectural manuscripts, is estimated at over $450 million. Wexler raised an eyebrow. Ms. Harlow, were you aware of this valuation? Selina exhaled slowly. I was under the impression the property had been restructured into a family asset. Your name doesn't appear on the trust, I said, looking directly at her. And the permit applications you submitted for structural changes? They violated the governing rules of the building and the trust, which brings us here. The board members exchanged quiet glances. Then Wexler looked up. Thank you. We'll deliberate now. We waited. 10 minutes, then 15. The silence stretched like glass, delicate but ready to break. When they returned, Wexler's voice was even. The board acknowledges the validity of the trust and has reviewed the violation notice. We vote unanimously to recognize Charmy Durant as the legal owner of Unit 31A. All renovation permits issued under Ms. Harlow are hereby revoked. Ms. Harlow will have 10 days to vacate the premises. No applause, no shock. Just paper being stacked neatly and a gavel that didn't exist tapping the edge of Wexler's folder. I stood slowly, adjusted my coat. This isn't a victory, I said, voice level. It's a restoration. As I turned to leave, Selina said nothing. Not at first, but just as I passed her chair, she looked up. Not with anger, but something colder. She always picked you, she said quietly, even when you were a ghost in this house. I didn't stop walking, but my hands tightened at my sides. Ghosts don't forget. They remember everything, especially what you tried to bury. By the time I got home from the board meeting, the press had already done the talking for me. I didn't need to say a word. The headline on one of the local news sites read, Architect's daughter restores legacy after bitter estate battle. It was clean, sanitized, but it made one thing clear. I was no longer invisible. Still, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the pause before another blow. 3 days later, just before midnight, I received a message from a firm I didn't recognize. A legal firm apparently retained on behalf of an anonymous party. They had submitted a complaint, formally accusing me of forging trust documentation. Attached to the message was a PDF, photos of a printed will. One page, my mother's signature, my own. A timestamp that placed my name on the document 3 days before Mom's recorded final signature. Fraud. That was the word they used. A word that felt too sharp and too false to land cleanly, but it cut just the same. An hour later, someone leaked it to social media. Not a news outlet, not even a blogger, just a faceless account with a caption that read, Trust fund baby caught faking her way into inheritance. It spread like dry grass catching flame. No context, no correction, just insinuation. I stared at the screen for a long while. And then I got up, walked to the file drawer I hadn't touched since the funeral, and pulled out the envelope Franklin had marked Private Handwritten Addendum. I remembered what he'd said the day I visited his office. Your mother wrote this with no intention of it being read by lawyers first. She wanted clarity, not litigation. I unfolded the first page. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, tight, deliberate, not like her usual messy post-it notes or scribbles on the margins of architectural sketches. If any part of this home is altered, structurally, legally, or reputationally, by anyone attempting to distort my wishes, their claim to it becomes null. This isn't punishment. This is protection. The truth is worth preserving, not debating. It was signed, dated, and attached to a scanned floor plan with highlighted notes. Her notes, about which walls could never be touched. Walls that Selena had torn down during her so-called modernization. I forwarded the entire file to Franklin, CC'd the estate lawyer, and added one line. Please notify the condo board. This is my formal response. No rage, no plea, just fact. I spent the next day in silence. No media interviews, no angry posts, no rebuttals. Instead, I went back to the condo, alone this time. I wanted to walk through it before it stopped being a battleground and became a home again. I unlocked the door, walked in. The space was empty. Selena hadn't been by since the meeting, but I could feel the tension lingering like smoke. I went to the archive room. It had been resealed after the board's vote. The keypad had been replaced, and I now had the code. I opened it. Inside, nothing had been restored. The plastered wall was still smooth where she'd covered up the built-in shelves. The carpet had been stripped. The ceiling lights were harsh and clinical. But in the far left corner, a single cabinet remained. One she hadn't managed to gut. It was locked, of course, but the key had been sitting in my mother's old sewing kit, in a drawer no one else had touched. I opened the cabinet. Inside was a sketch pad. Old, water-stained at the edges. The kind my mother had always used for her personal designs, never for clients. On the first page, a pencil drawing of the condo, floor plan, handwritten notes, and then a phrase scrawled across the margin, as if she'd written it quickly, without stopping to think, this is hers. Let her prove it the right way. Not let her fight for it. Let her prove it. That night, just after 2 a.m., I heard the front door buzz. I checked the camera. It was her. Selena. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She stood there with her phone in one hand and a box in the other, probably here to retrieve the last of her belongings. I buzzed the door. She stepped in, walked through the lobby with a calm that felt practiced. I met her at the entryway. We didn't say hello. She glanced around. So this is it now, she muttered. I nodded. You came for the box? She handed it to me without a word, then added, You think this makes you better? I looked at her. Not through her. Not around her. At her. No, I think it makes me right. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, quiet for a beat, then said, She always saw you as the safe one, the backup plan, the one who wouldn't get in the way. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the desk, picked up the legal notice the building had delivered earlier that day, handed it to her. Effective immediately, I said. You're barred from the unit until further legal review. That includes the common areas. Her hand shook as she took it, just slightly. You really think this makes you better than me? I didn't answer her, because for the first time, I realized this was never about being better. It was about being right. 3 days after I handed Selena the legal notice, I stood barefoot in the center of the penthouse, watching light filter through the tall windows as a quiet hum of voices echoed down the hallway. The board had arranged for a press walkthrough to mark the condo's new designation as a historical property, an effort to honor my mother's contributions, not just to architecture, but to the cultural landscape of the city. It wasn't my idea, but I didn't oppose it. Not anymore. I wasn't protecting a structure. I was protecting what it stood for. I wore black slacks, a simple cream blouse, no makeup except a thin stroke of eyeliner. I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to be present. The walls had been left mostly bare, at my request. I didn't want this to look like a gallery. I wanted space to breathe, to remember, to begin again. Except for one piece. In the heart of the living room, mounted under soft lighting, was a mixed media canvas my mother had started in her final months. I'd found it in the sealed cabinet tucked behind the plaster wall, one of the few things Selena hadn't reached. It showed two female figures. One was fully painted, in rich oils, colors bold and certain. The other was a sketch, faint, almost translucent, her features unfinished. My mother had titled it Balance. The press arrived in small waves, a journalist from an architecture magazine, a photographer from a city newspaper, one young videographer who set up a single camera and asked if I wanted to be recorded. I declined. "I'll say a few words," I told them. "No script, just something simple." When everyone had settled, I stood before the painting. "This isn't a museum," I said. "It's a memory, one we don't all agree on, but one I will protect." No one clapped. No one needed to. As I turned to walk them toward the guest rooms, I caught movement near the entry. A familiar silhouette. Selena. She stepped in quietly, hair pulled back, face bare. She wore a loose sweater and slacks. No jewelry, no entourage, just her. A board member approached her immediately, offering a copy of the legal order. "I'm only here to see the art," she said, lifting her hand slightly. "I won't touch anything." The journalist glanced at me, unsure. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The board rep nodded once and firmly stated, "You'll need to step back into the hallway, Ms. Harlow. This is a restricted tour." Selena didn't protest. She just stood there, staring past me at the painting. Her eyes stayed fixed on the unfinished figure. "This house was always ours," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. Just because she had the key doesn't mean she owned the story. The air grew tight. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked toward the painting, slowly, deliberately, and stood in front of it, not blocking it, not claiming it, just facing it. Selena turned and walked out, her steps heavy, uneven. No one followed her. The rest of the tour passed quickly. Polite questions, light nods, murmurs about legacy and design, and how personal history can live inside walls. By early evening, the press had gone. I turned off the main lights, closed the curtains, lit a single candle. Then I stood before the painting again. I stared at the second figure, the one in charcoal, the one she never finished. Was that me? Or was it Selena? Or maybe it wasn't either of us. Maybe it was both. Maybe she didn't finish it on purpose. Because some stories weren't meant to be completed. They were meant to linger. I didn't erase it. I didn't fill it in. I left it exactly as it was. Before going to bed, I placed a small brass plate beneath the frame. I engraved it that night. No date, no artist bio, just one sentence. What's left unfinished sometimes says the most. Some stories aren't meant to be finished, just remembered, with care. That morning began with the smell of freshly cut lavender. Not from any expensive candle or curated arrangement, just a single bundle, tied with twine, left at the foot of the front door. No note, no signature, just placed there with intention. I stood for a moment, barefoot on the cold tile. The soft hum of morning traffic, a distant echo through the windows. I picked it up, pressed it to my nose. It smelled like her. Like Mom's kitchen on Sundays, when she'd tuck sprigs into a jar of warm honey and call it cheap therapy. 1 month had passed since the board vote. The penthouse had changed, not in structure, but in spirit. What was once sterile had been rehumanized, not through luxury, but by memory. I walked the halls slowly that morning, each step deliberate. There was no rush. Today wasn't about me. It wasn't about Selena either. It wasn't even about our mother. Today was for those who had never met her. We were hosting the first open morning of the Odessa Durant Reflection Room. Not a gallery, not a museum. A space for pause, for silence, for stories not yet told. The apartment had been gently rearranged into a series of quiet moments. In one corner, there was a sketch station with free paper, pencils, and a sign that simply read, "What do you wish your mother had told you?" Across from that, we'd set up a tea table, the same rickety one she used in her classroom when she volunteered at the Public Arts Center. Teresa Albano, our old housekeeper, had insisted we serve black tea in mismatched mugs. "That's how she always did it," Teresa said, placing the chipped porcelain with care. Next to the hallway leading to the bedrooms, there was a wall lined with envelopes, each one containing a letter written by a young artist, addressed to a woman I wish I'd known. We didn't vet the content. That wasn't the point. They were sealed and taped gently, like offerings. A living archive of imagined connection. By 8:30, Ria Menken had arrived with a folded blanket and a bouquet of tulips. She said little, just hugged me once, then wandered off toward the sketch station. 10 minutes later, I saw it. A plain envelope slipped through the mail slot. No stamp, no handwriting on the front. Just there, waiting. I opened it quietly, away from the others. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick, high quality, familiar. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. "You were right. She did choose, and I see now why." That was all it said. No apology, no blame. Just acceptance. I folded it, walked to the library shelf, and tucked it into the spine of The Ethics of Space, a book my mother had kept at her bedside for decades. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't feel triumphant. Closure doesn't always look like justice. Sometimes it looks like quiet honesty. By 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. Our first guests. I opened the door and found a young girl, maybe 15, with her grandmother. The girl wore a faded backpack. Her hair was tied up with a pen stuck through the knot like a makeshift bun. I smiled. "Welcome," I said. The grandmother's voice was quiet. She wanted to see the room, her mother. She was too tired to come. The girl added, "She never really had time for her art, so I figured I'd come for both of us." I stepped aside and motioned them in. "Then you already understand everything this place was built for." They walked slowly, the girl trailing her fingers along the wall as they passed. Outside, etched into the glass panel beside the entrance, was the only quote I had allowed on display. "Legacy is not what you keep, it's what you leave open." The morning continued gently. No press, no speeches, just people, some crying, some laughing, most just sitting quietly, watching, remembering, dreaming. I walked to the west window, the one Mom always claimed had the only decent light in this whole city. The chair she used to read in had been restored. The cushion was new, but the frame was the same. I sat. The painting still hung in the main room. Balance. Still unfinished. Still perfect. I heard the door open again, but didn't turn. If it was someone meant to be here, they'd find their way in. And if not, the door would stay open anyway. I never locked that door. I only made sure it opened for the right ones. "Hi, I'm Manfred." On Thanksgiving, my parents called me ungrateful, to my face, in front of everyone. But that wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was years in the making. Like how they drained my college fund to bankroll my stepbrother, or how they deleted me from the family montage, like I never existed. I stayed quiet for years, but not anymore. I showed up 38 minutes late, not by accident, on purpose. I figured if I walked in after everyone was already buzzed from wine and carbs, maybe I'd blend into the background and escape the usual charade. I was wrong. The second I stepped inside my father's house, the house I grew up in, the one that looked nothing like it used to, everything paused just long enough for me to feel it. That slight shift in air, the half-second of delayed greetings, eyes flicking toward me and away. People smiled, but their eyes didn't. My stepmother, Marlene, made her way over in heels too high for comfort and arms open too wide. "There she is," she said, all sugar. "We were just talking about you." Liar. I let her hug me, a quick shoulder tap that smelled like department store perfume and control. I spotted Beckett across the room, already holding court with two uncles and a family friend from church. He lifted his whiskey glass in my direction, like I was someone he vaguely remembered from high school. I scanned the room for Sorrel. She was by the kitchen island, laughing. Too loud, too perfect. She looked like she belonged here. I didn't. They'd made a shrine to Thanksgiving. Table settings with golden leaves, personalized place cards, even a pie bar. I bet Marlene paid someone to stage it. Nothing here looked like family, just branding. I moved toward the dining room and caught pieces of conversation that had nothing to do with me. Someone's real estate deal, Beckett's promotion, Harlan's retirement speech at the VFW. Not one person asked me how I was doing, not that I expected them to. Then came the toast. Marlene clinked her wine glass and stood up. "Before we eat," she began, "I just want to say how thankful I am for all of you. This year has been challenging, and yet here we are, stronger, closer, and more united than ever." My jaw tightened. She turned her gaze toward the long table. "Let's raise a glass to this incredible family, to those who show up, to those who contribute, and yes, even to the ungrateful ones." The table erupted in laughter. I felt the blood rush to my ears. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't have to. I knew exactly who she meant. No one said a word. No one stopped her. They just drank. I didn't touch my glass. Instead, I stared down at the plate in front of me and wished I hadn't come. My father cleared his throat and changed the subject. Classic Harland. Let it pass. Avoid the conflict. Pretend it never happened. "We've got turkey, 3 kinds of stuffing," he said. "Let's dig in." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I smiled, just barely. Half an hour later, over dessert, it got worse. Marlene was 3 glasses deep by then, her tongue looser. "You know," she said to no one in particular, "Maddie's probably at home with her books and her cats when she's not lawyering. Isn't that right, dear?" I bit down on the inside of my cheek. Beckett chimed in, the smirk already in place. "Saving the world one angry email at a time." A few polite chuckles floated around, but mostly the room tensed. Not enough to stop anything, just enough to feel awkward for 5 seconds. Then they moved on. Like they always do. I didn't say a word. That's the thing about this family. They don't stab you in the back. They smile and do it face to face. And when you flinch, you're too sensitive. I took a sip of water, my hand steady even if my chest wasn't. I scanned the room. Every detail of this house had been redone, modernized, sterilized. Not one photo of me on the walls. But Beckett's face was everywhere. Graduations, vacations, a ribbon-cutting ceremony. His success was the family's pride. Mine was an inconvenience. I knew better than to speak up. When I did, it always ended the same way. Harland with that disappointed sigh, Marlene's fake concern, Beckett's smirk, Sorrel's silence. They had their roles, and I was cast as the difficult one, the outsider, the one who couldn't let go. But something shifted tonight. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was silence, sharp, cold, absolute. I didn't belong here. And maybe that wasn't a tragedy. Maybe that was the freedom I'd been avoiding. So I smiled. I lifted my glass, not to them but to myself, and made a silent promise. Never again. I set my glass down with more grace than I felt. They didn't notice. Or maybe they did and chose not to care. Either way, I was done expecting acknowledgement. Harlan cleared his throat and stood, fork tapping gently against his wine glass. "Before dessert," he began, the room quieting with trained obedience, "I'd like to say a few words. It's Thanksgiving after all." God, here we go. "Family is the cornerstone of legacy," he said, staring straight ahead. And legacies, well, they don't build themselves. They require sacrifice, commitment, loyalty. Marlene nodded approvingly beside him, her hands folded in her lap like a smug debutante. We've taken steps recently to ensure that everything we've worked for, everything we've built, will stay in the right hands, he continued. I felt my stomach drop. He didn't say my name. Not once. But I could feel the omission like a slap. He listed Beckett's new business expansion, Sorel's thriving restaurant, their shared values, and their dedication to the family vision. No mention of the firm I built from scratch. No note of my pro bono work. No sign I'd ever mattered. And those who walk away from the family, he added, shouldn't expect the family to walk with them. Beckett smiled, slow and lazy, like he'd been waiting for this. Sorel looked down at her plate. No one else flinched. I wanted to scream, wanted someone to say, "That's not fair." But no one did. They were all in on it. Just when I thought I'd hit my quota of humiliation for the night, the lights dimmed. "We have a little surprise," Marlene trilled, rising. "A video tribute. 40 years of family memories." I barely breathed as the screen flickered to life. Photos began to fade in. Harland in uniform, Marlene pregnant with Sorel, Beckett in soccer gear. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, dance recitals. But not one image of me. Not one. A full decade vanished, like I never existed in this family at all. And then, briefly, a group photo at a backyard barbecue. There I was, behind everyone else, blurred, unnamed. A decorative extra. A kid at the end of the table whispered, "Who's that lady?" My chest constricted. My hands curled into fists beneath the napkin. I wasn't forgotten. I was erased. It wasn't just neglect. It was precision. A calculated deletion. The lights came back on. Applause filled the room. No one looked at me. They all moved on. I sat frozen, surrounded by smiles that felt like knives. The laughter and chatter returned like I hadn't just watched myself be scrubbed out of my own life. I excused myself from the table. In the bathroom mirror, I saw it. Not sadness. Something colder. Not anger. Something deeper. Recognition. They didn't see me because they didn't want to. Because seeing me meant acknowledging everything they'd done. Everything they'd taken. This wasn't about being left out of a video or a dinner toast. It was about being written out of a family, page by page, until I didn't even qualify as a footnote. When I returned to the table, dessert had been served. Pumpkin pie, whipped cream, perfectly cut slices like everything else in this choreographed charade. No one asked where I'd gone. I picked up my fork and stared at the plate. I didn't taste a thing. Because while they laughed and talked and praised each other, I sat in silence with one thought repeating over and over in my head. I'm not one of them anymore. Maybe I never was. I left my plate untouched, excused myself as quietly as I could, and walked down the hall to the guest room, the one they still called the office, though nothing important had ever been worked on in it. I sat on the edge of the futon, heels still on, eyes fixed on the beige carpet. That's when the memories started to bleed in. There was another night, years ago, that felt eerily like this one. My law school graduation. I had walked across that stage alone. Everyone else had rows of cheering parents, siblings holding signs, girlfriends crying behind phone cameras. My chair sat empty. I kept telling myself they must be late, or stuck in traffic, but no, they never came. Later, Marlene told me they had dinner plans for Beckett's birthday. We couldn't miss it. He's only 30 once. That day, I learned exactly where I ranked in this family. Below convenience. The applause from that graduation echoed in my head, as if mocking me, clapping for someone who had no one there to hear it. I opened my purse and pulled out my phone, scrolling without looking, just needing to move. Anything to silence the echo. That's when I saw the email. It had come in months after graduation. From the bank. The college fund my mother had set aside for me, money she worked double shifts to save, was gone. Transferred out, signed off by Harland. I had called him, voice shaking. His response? Beckett had an opportunity. He needed a push. You're smart. You'll figure it out. No apology, no remorse. Just the same dismissive tone he used when I scraped my knee as a kid, and he told me to walk it off. When I told Marlene, she shrugged. What's done is done, sweetheart. Dwelling won't bring the money back. I ended up taking out private loans and working 2 jobs my first year. I kept the emails, the statements, the proof. Not for revenge, at least not back then, but because some part of me needed confirmation that it wasn't all in my head, that it happened, that I wasn't crazy. But I let it go. I convinced myself they made a tough decision for the family. I swallowed the betrayal and buried the rage. Now I saw it clearly. It wasn't one betrayal, it was a pattern. And I had been taught to stay silent so long, I forgot what it felt like to call something what it was. The truth? They stole from me. Not just money, not just a seat at the table. They stole my place, my voice, my belonging. I stood up and caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked composed, but I could see the cracks behind her eyes. Cracks that had been spidering out for years. I wasn't weak. I had survived without them. Built something from ashes they pretended never existed. And tonight, something shifted for good. They wanted a version of me that played along, smiled, accepted crumbs, and called it love. But I'm not that woman anymore. I opened my encrypted cloud folder, one I hadn't touched in years, and skimmed through the old documents. College fund bank logs, notarized signatures, screenshots of Beckett's startup site from the same month my fund disappeared. I hovered over the contact labeled Delphine. She was the only one in this family who ever treated me like a person. And if anyone still had the guts to speak the truth, it would be her. I tapped her name and typed, "Can we talk tomorrow?" My thumb hovered a second longer than it needed to. Then I hit send. The morning light made everything in my apartment look softer than it really was. I stared at my phone. The silence after that sent message growing heavier by the hour. Then it rang. Sorrel. I hesitated. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but some stubborn part of me needed to hear what she had to say. Maybe I wanted to give her one last chance. "Hey," she said, all breezy and false, like she hadn't sat silent through my erasure last night. "Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling after, the big dinner?" I laughed, once, flat. "Is that what we're calling it? Dinner?" A pause. "Look, I know it got weird." "You knew," I said, cutting her off. "Don't pretend you didn't." There was a long silence. Then she sighed. "Yeah, I knew. I've known for a long time." I closed my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. "And you said nothing." "What was I supposed to do, Maddie? Start a war? It wouldn't have changed anything. I just wanted peace." Peace. That word again. "You didn't want peace," I said quietly. "You wanted comfort. There's a difference." She didn't argue, just whispered, "I'm sorry," like it would undo the years of complicity. I ended the call without another word. I wasn't angry. Not really. Just done. Done waiting for people to grow a spine. 2 hours later, I stood in front of Delphine's door. She opened it before I could knock. "You came," she said. No surprise in her voice, just something steady, like she'd been expecting this moment for years. I stepped inside, and her living room felt like a museum of things the rest of the family had tried to forget. Old photos, dusty books, a framed letter in my mother's handwriting. Delphine didn't waste time. "I kept everything," she said, walking to a wooden box beside the bookshelf. "Because I knew one day you'd come looking for the truth." She handed me a folder. Inside, bank transfer receipts, dated 2 weeks before Beckett's launch. Signatures, account numbers, legal documents, and then my mother's original will. It was right there, clear as daylight. The fund was meant exclusively for my education, not to be touched under any circumstance. I felt the room tilt slightly. "And this?" I asked, holding up a yellowed sheet of lined paper. "Notes," she said. I wrote them down after conversations with your father, when he started rewriting history. You never said anything. You weren't ready, she said, her voice steady. But now I think you are. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But all I felt was something settling, like truth had weight, and it had just landed in my hands. Back home, I laid everything out on the kitchen table, scanned every page, matched signatures, checked dates. There was no more room for doubt. This wasn't neglect. This was deliberate. They didn't forget me. They removed me. One decision, one story, one erasure at a time. I opened my laptop, pulled up my legal notes, and began building a timeline. Not out of revenge, but to remember. To put the story back together the way it really happened. They wanted peace. I wanted the truth. And for the first time in years, I felt steady. No anxiety, no spiraling, just direction. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, I'd be the one writing it. 2 mornings later, a courier envelope slid under my apartment door. No knock, no warning. Just silence and pressure, neatly packaged. Inside was a letter from Marlene's legal assistant. The language was polished, professional, like someone trying too hard to sound polite while handing you a knife. In the interest of maintaining harmony, it read, Ms. Manfred Renly is invited to voluntarily step away from the family trust and estate planning process. Such a gesture would reflect goodwill and understanding of broader family dynamics. Goodwill, understanding. They always used soft words to dress up sharp things. I read it twice. Then again. Then I printed a copy, pulled out a pen, and signed. Below the line, I added by hand, I don't want a cent from people who never wanted me. No ceremony, no lawyer, no audience, just truth. I folded it once, slid it into a plain envelope, and left it on my kitchen table. My mind drifted back, uninvited, to a different kind of envelope, one that never came in time. 2 years ago, I was in court when I saw Marlene's name flash on my phone. The text was short. Your mom had a stroke. We're at St. Vincent's, no urgency, no context. By the time I arrived, the nurses were changing the linens. I never got to say goodbye. A soft-spoken woman in scrubs looked at me and said, She kept asking if you were on your way. Those words still haunt me. I walked out of that hospital feeling like I'd lost 2 people, my mother and any last illusion I had about what this family was. Later that night, Marlene told me it was just one of those things. She said, I didn't think it was that serious. You were busy with work. And Harland? He never brought it up again. Like grief should come with an expiration date. I've forgiven a lot of things in my life, but not that. Never that. Back in the present, I stood by the window, envelope in hand. The city looked calm. Cars humming by, people walking dogs, rain beginning to mist the sidewalks. I held the signed waiver between my fingers. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like relief. For years, I thought letting go would make me weak. That walking away meant I'd lost. Now I knew better. Staying would have broken me. Leaving saved me. I slipped on my coat, walked 2 blocks to the courthouse mailbox, and dropped it in. No tracking, no return address, just a clean cut. I didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I went home, made tea, sat in silence, and for the first time in years, the silence wasn't hollow. It was mine. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I sat in a small glass-walled office across from my attorney. A legal pad rested between us, filled with notes I'd been adding for years without realizing it. Receipts, dates, patterns. She flipped through the pages I brought, Delphine's documents, my mother's will, and the transfer logs that sealed everything. This isn't a fight, she said, tapping a page with her pen. This is a statement. I leaned back. Then let's make it loud. She didn't smile. Neither did I. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and drafted 1 email, just 1. But it would land like a bomb. 2. Every blood relative still breathing. Every in-law who ever fake smiled through a betrayal. Every lawyer and advisor who'd helped bury the truth. Subject: I thought you should see this. Attached were 4 PDFs bank statements with highlighted transfers, a scan of my mother's original will, screenshots of Beckett's company timeline, the guest list for that tribute video where my name never appeared. I didn't add a single sentence of explanation. I hit send, and I walked away. My phone started buzzing within 10 minutes. Cousins, aunts, even a second uncle I hadn't heard from in years. Is this real? Why didn't you say something sooner? I always had a feeling. I ignored them all. Harlan didn't respond. Not a text, not a call. Just silence, the same tool he always used when control slipped from his hands. Marlene, on the other hand, didn't disappoint. Her reply was short. This is a family matter. Please retract. No apology, no concern, just demand, masked as etiquette. The Queen trying to command the room while the ceiling caved in. I didn't answer. Beckett vanished. No calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive subtweets. Total blackout, which meant he was scared. Good. By nightfall, I'd shut off my phone and poured myself a glass of red wine. I stood by my window, watching headlights blur across the wet street. Not because I was worried, because I knew exactly what was coming next. At my lawyer's suggestion, we began preparing a formal complaint. Not because I wanted to sue, not because I wanted the money, because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and this rot had spread far enough. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. And this? This was only the first strike. It started with whispers. A partner at a firm I used to clerk for reached out. Casual tone, not casual content. Hey, Maddie. Heard you've stirred the pot a bit lately. Beckett's been calling around. Says you're going through something. Says you're making things up. I didn't blink. I didn't even blink. He said what exactly? I asked calmly. That you're unwell, carrying family baggage, that this is some kind of breakdown. I laughed. Quiet, dry. He's trying to paint me as unstable? Yeah, he said. He's shopping the narrative. I thanked him and hung up. Classic Beckett. If you can't bury the truth, discredit the person who speaks it. He was calling favors, leveraging connections, spinning lies. What he didn't realize was that I'd walked through fire to get here, and I wasn't stepping back just because he threw smoke. I called Delphine. She answered on the first ring. He's trying to smear me, I said. He's scared. He should be, she replied. I was hoping you'd call. There's something else. 10 minutes later, she forwarded me a file I hadn't seen in years, because she'd never sent it. It was a scan of a formal HR complaint from my first job out of law school. I had forgotten about it, or maybe I'd forced myself to. Back then, I thought it was paranoia. I thought I was imagining things, a missing draft, a leaked pitch. The timing had been too perfect, but I couldn't prove anything. Until now. Delphine had saved everything, email headers, screenshots. Even the log showing Beckett had logged into my personal computer using a remote access app I'd stupidly left open. All while he was helping me set up my home Wi-Fi during a holiday weekend. He had stolen my ideas and pitched them as his own to a competing firm. And it had nearly tanked my career. Delphine's voice cracked slightly. Your father made me promise not to tell you, said it would only make things worse. I regret listening to him. I thanked her. But I didn't call my lawyer. I called a journalist. A woman I knew who had built her career on stories just like this. Truth wrapped in betrayal. Scandal sitting beneath silk ties and trust funds. She didn't ask for proof. She just said, send everything. By morning, the headline was already making its rounds. Finance exec accused of corporate theft. Source alleges family cover-up. Within hours, Beckett's firm went into panic mode. Clients started pulling contracts. His face vanished from the company website. His Instagram went private. Harlan tried calling. Twice. I let it ring. Marlene left a voicemail that was so on brand, I almost laughed. "You've humiliated us. I hope you're happy. This family supported you, and this is how you repay us?" Supported me? They couldn't even spell my name right on birthday cards. I sat in my office reading emails from strangers. One aunt finally cracked. "I always knew something was wrong." I should have said something. Too late. I wasn't angry anymore, just clear. Beckett could spin stories, but this wasn't a courtroom. This was the court of public opinion, and he'd just lost his jury. That night, I got a message from a former intern. She was fresh out of law school when she worked under me. Quiet, brilliant, overlooked in all the ways I'd been once. Her message read, "Thank you. People like you make room for people like me." I didn't smile. Not really. But something inside me settled. Just a little. They thought I'd set fire to the house. I hadn't even raised my voice yet. The next morning, I walked into the county clerk's office with a folder under my arm and history in my hands. The complaint was already prepared. Typed, formatted, and reviewed line by line. Misuse of trust funds, forgery of consent, breach of fiduciary duty. 3 names sat at the top: Harland Renly, Marlene Renly, Beckett Renly. Attached were everything they thought I'd never find. Notarized bank records, authorization forms with mismatched signatures, and Delphine's signed affidavit verifying the original terms of my mother's will. By noon, the documents were public record, and by 4 p.m., they were accessible to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection and a reason to look. I gave them the truth. What the world did with it wasn't my problem. By evening, Beckett's LinkedIn was gone. His firm had issued a vague statement about a temporary suspension pending internal review, but I already knew what that meant. Harlan's name disappeared from the Veterans Foundation's website. A line added quietly below the board list. Pending ethics investigation. Marlene canceled her beloved charity gala. "Out of respect for privacy," the statement said. Right. Sorrel texted me late that night. I didn't know it would go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "You never asked how far it already went for me." She didn't write back. Harlan, though, he finally did. The subject line of his email: "You're no longer welcome in this family." There it was, the last brick in the wall they'd spent decades building between us, now handed to me like a souvenir. I opened a new draft. Typed, paused, deleted. Typed again. And then I didn't send it. Instead, I wrote it out on a notepad and read it to myself. "You erased me. Now I'm just finishing the job you started." I closed the notebook and turned off my phone. There was nothing left to say to them. No more defense. No more proof. Just distance. The real kind. I sat in my office as the sun dropped behind the city skyline, gold leaking through the blinds. The news sites were still spinning. Articles, reposts, speculation. But inside, everything was still. Not hollow, not numb. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after you've told the truth loud enough to be heard, and no longer care who believes it. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my place. Nothing fancy. Just roast chicken, roasted carrots, and a bottle of wine I didn't pick for the label. Delphine came early with apple pie and her quiet, comforting presence. One of my interns showed up with her girlfriend and nervous laughter, unsure if they were overdressed or underexperienced. A friend from my running group brought garlic bread and stories that didn't involve lawsuits or betrayals. We sat around my kitchen table, small, scratched, real. No place cards, no veiled jabs, no toasts pretending to be compliments. We passed food. We talked about books, terrible movies, inside jokes. There was no pecking order, no power plays, just people, just connection. After dessert, Delphine helped me rinse dishes. She didn't say much, but she didn't have to. Her eyes were steady, proud. The next morning, I drove alone to a quiet cemetery on the edge of town. I brought no flowers, just a letter. I sat at my mother's grave and read it aloud, even though I wasn't sure I believed in any version of the afterlife. I did it, Mom. I kept my spine. I kept your name clean. I'm not in their house anymore. I'm not under their thumb. The wind moved the leaves around my boots. I folded the letter and tucked it beneath the stone vase, weighted with a small rock. I didn't cry. I just breathed. And then I left. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. I didn't need to listen. I saw the name before I deleted it. Marlene. I pressed play anyway, just long enough to catch the tone. You got what you wanted. We lost everything. I hope you're proud. I stopped it. Deleted it. That wasn't pride she heard in my silence. It was peace. They thought I wanted to take something from them. But the truth was simpler. I just needed to get myself back. That night, I sat in bed with a cup of tea and a quiet house. I looked around at the space I'd built. Not perfect, not pristine, but mine. I thought about everything they took, and then everything I reclaimed. Some of the wounds would never heal clean. That's not how it works. But they didn't have to. I didn't need closure to move forward. I just needed clarity. I wouldn't fill the empty places with people who only showed up to take. I chose solitude over illusion, truth over tolerance, peace over pretending. I chose me. They called me ungrateful, but I'm more grateful than ever. Grateful that I finally walked away. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I spent years trying to earn a place at a table that was never built for me. Tried to prove my worth to people who had already decided who I was. But here's what I've learned. Peace is not given. You create it. Family isn't about blood, it's about respect, truth, and safety. And healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means release. If you're carrying weight that doesn't belong to you, let this be your permission to set it down. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to rewrite your own story. And you don't need anyone's approval to start. So now I'll turn it to you. Have you ever had to walk away from a version of family to find yourself? Do you believe silence keeps peace, or just prolongs harm? If this story hit close to home, or helped you see something more clearly, drop a 1 in the comments, or let me know where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with it, that's okay too. Tell me why. I read everything. And if you're still here, still listening, don't forget to hit subscribe for more stories that speak truth, stir hearts, and remind us we're not alone. Until next time, take care of yourself like someone you love.
Hi there, I'm Marcy. On my wedding day, right in front of friends, cameras, and champagne toasts, my parents handed me a frame that read, "To our biggest disappointment." They called it a joke, laughed like it was clever, but that was just the beginning. They'd already stolen my ideas, used my money behind my back, and twisted my silence into a weapon. And I let it happen. For years. Why? Because I thought love meant staying quiet. There's something eerie about Southern silence. It stretches long, like the moss-covered oaks hanging low over the grounds of Willow Creek Manor, beautiful, deliberate, and hiding more than it shows. That's exactly how the day felt. My wedding day. Savannah in late spring is the kind of picturesque people book photographers for, but that day felt like something else, like a stage set too perfectly. The sky was gold, the strings played soft, and I smiled until my jaw ached. Everyone assumed I was the kind of bride who'd cry tears of joy at the altar. Instead, I was just trying to keep my hands from trembling. Jonas looked at me like I was magic. That part was real. He held my hand through the entire ceremony like it tethered him to this world. If I had any doubt left about saying yes, he erased it with one look when the officiant asked if I was ready to begin again. And yet, deep inside me, there was a knot that hadn't loosened in years. It was tied to something no wedding could fix. My family. I should have known better than to expect anything different. I'd convinced myself maybe, just maybe, they'd show up for me like I'd shown up for them all these years. But hope has a way of making a fool out of people like me. My mother, Avis, made her entrance fashionably late, dressed in taupe shimmer that caught the light and demanded attention, her signature move. She air-kissed my cheek like I was a co-worker, not her daughter, and whispered, "You're not late, that's good," as if I'd ever been the problem. Then came Delphine. White dress, No irony. Her heels clicked on the stone like a warning shot. She smiled like she knew something I didn't. There was no, "You look stunning," or "Congratulations." Just that grin she always wore when she'd rigged a game and couldn't wait to watch me lose. I told myself not to read too much into it. Maybe I was just tired or nervous or still carrying old wounds in a new dress. But that illusion cracked a few hours earlier while the florist was setting up, and I went back inside for a moment of quiet. Passing the kitchen hallway, I heard her voice, clear as glass. "Wait till she sees it. She'll either cry or combust." My mother's chuckle followed. "It's just cheeky. She'll survive." I froze. I wanted to confront them, to scream, "What did you do?" But instead, I did what I'd always done. I swallowed it, smiled when the planner asked if I wanted to see the cake table again, said no, returned to the mirror and touched up my blush. Survival mode, my oldest skill. Hours later, the ceremony wrapped. Toasts were made. Everyone clapped a little too loudly. I watched Delphine scroll on her phone through most of it. She raised her glass during Jonas's speech but didn't say a word during mine. And then, as the reception moved into the courtyard, came the moment I'll never forget. It was Delphine, of course, who handed the gift to the MC. A neatly wrapped box with cream paper and gold trim. The card read, "From Mom and Delphine." Cute! The MC made a joke, something about sentimental sisters, and invited me to unwrap it in front of everyone. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body said don't. But too many eyes were on me. I smiled, peeled back the paper, and opened the box. It was a wooden frame. Thick, heavy, the kind people hang in hallways or above mantels, and engraved across the top in polished brass letters, "To our biggest disappointment, finally settling." I stared. The words didn't compute at first. My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I thought maybe I'd misread it. A prank, something from another table. But no. Delphine was filming me. Her phone tilted at an angle she'd practiced. "It's just a joke," she called out, her voice bright like confetti. A few guests laughed, nervously. Jonas stood still, shoulders tight, eyes locked on the frame. My father looked at his plate. My mother smiled like it was some edgy Hallmark moment. I didn't say a word. I placed the frame gently on the dessert table, right beside the lemon tarts my mother insisted we include because they're classic. Then I turned back to the crowd and said, "Thank you. That's it. No scene, no tears, just a thank you with a smile so calm it made Delphine lower her phone. But inside me, something flipped. I wasn't hurt. I was done. People like them don't use knives. They use moments, public ones they can later rewrite as jokes. They laugh while you bleed and then ask why you're being dramatic. They didn't know I'd heard them earlier. They didn't expect me to stand tall, let alone smile. But what they really didn't expect was that this wedding wasn't the beginning of us. It was the beginning of me, without them. I looked around at the guests. The lights shimmered. The music played. The air smelled of roses and champagne. But something new had entered my lungs. Something clean. It was the scent of truth. I whispered to myself just under my breath, "You don't get to do this again." They thought this was a cute way to remind me where I stood. What they didn't realize was, it marked the last time I'd stand quietly. By the time Jonas and I reached the hotel, the silence had taken on a different weight. It wasn't the quiet you get after a party winds down. It was heavier, like something had been stripped clean and left bare, the kind of stillness that doesn't comfort but confirms. He fell asleep fast, suit jacket still tossed over the chair, shoes kicked half under the bed. I let him rest. He'd done his part. He was the calm to my chaos tonight, and I knew this wasn't his battle. Not yet. I sat by the window in a white robe that didn't feel like mine. The Savannah skyline blinked faintly outside. The lights of wedding guests' Ubers still scattered across the long driveway below. I stared at my reflection in the glass, not my face, just the outline of someone trying too hard not to feel. But feelings don't ask permission, do they? I opened my notes app, typed slowly, list things they don't see, then paused, not sure what to write first. Then came the words. They don't see how much it cost me to love them anyway. And just like that, my mind dragged me backward. 1 year earlier. It was mid-October. Atlanta was cooling down, and I had just wrapped a funding pitch for a beach retreat brand I'd been working on for almost 8 months. Everything was finally aligning. My vision, my capital, my projections. I remember sitting at my dining table, sipping lukewarm coffee and adjusting the last deck slide when the phone rang. It was my mother. She never called during the day. Her voice cracked before I even said hello. She talked about overdue property taxes, refinancing gone sideways, and how they might lose the lake place if something didn't change. I could hear her pacing. Her breath was shallow. She said she didn't want to ask, but she had no one else. And I didn't hesitate. Of course I didn't. I told her I'd transfer 40 grand that afternoon. She gasped, "Oh, baby, you don't have to." But we both knew she expected I would. That was the role I played. I also sent her the PDF proposal, titled Coastal Reset. It was clean, light, filled with natural tones and glass accents, a space designed for creative restoration. I had poured myself into it. "Maybe if y'all end up keeping the house," I wrote in the email, "this could be the vibe to help rejuvenate it." She never replied to that part. 6 months later, I was scrolling through Instagram during a client flight delay when a photo stopped me cold. There it was. Delphine in a linen jumpsuit, standing in front of a freshly renovated beach house. Caption, "My healing home reveal. Every element was mine. The wicker pendant lights, the sage green backsplash tile, the oversized canvas art from a local artist I'd featured in my deck. And the kicker? Tagline across the top of the reel. A space to finally be free." I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the screen as the comments flooded in. "OMG, this is a dream. You're such a visionary, Delphine. How do you come up with this stuff?" I checked my email history, opened that message to Mom. The timestamp, 9:32 a.m. The forward to Delphine, 9:54 a.m., 22 minutes. That's all it took for my trust to become her blueprint. I locked my phone, took 3 slow breaths, told myself I must be overthinking. Surely they didn't mean it like that. That lie lasted exactly 1 week. Irina, my cousin on my dad's side, the one who never showed up to drama but always saw everything, texted me a screenshot late one evening. It was from the family group chat I wasn't included in. "Delphine, Mom really came through with that layout. Judel, that beach house is such a vibe, total upgrade. Cairo, LOL, manifesting with other people's brains." Message liked by both Delphine and Mom. I didn't reply. Not to Irina, not to anyone. I just saved the image to a folder I titled Clarity. Then I whispered to no one. That's the cost of my silence. Jonas stirred in the bed behind me. I looked back at him, peaceful and untouched by all this. I wondered what he'd say if he knew, if he'd look at me differently, if he'd ask why I never said anything. I already knew the answer, because I kept hoping they'd stop, if I just kept being useful. But tonight, under the soft hum of the hotel mini fridge, something shifted. They didn't just steal a design, they rewrote me. And for the first time, I started writing back. By the second morning after the wedding, something in me had clicked into place. Not healed, not settled, just focused. I woke early, not because I slept well, I didn't, but because my mind wouldn't shut off. Jonas was still dozing, one arm draped across my side of the bed, like he was holding the night in place. I slipped out quietly, showered, and walked down to the hotel cafe without waking him. The lobby was still half asleep. A few business travelers hunched over their laptops, earbuds in, eyes glazed. I grabbed a chamomile tea and settled near the window with mine. I was answering vendor emails, scrolling through RSVPs that came in too late, when a small alert pinged at the top of my screen. Security notification. Unauthorized access attempt blocked file. Mentorship budget 2022.xlx. Location, Savannah, Georgia. Device, MacBook Pro. I didn't move for a full 5 seconds. That file wasn't public. It wasn't something I'd ever shared on social media or posted. I had only ever sent it to one person, my mother. The blood in my arms went cool, not cold. Just measured. Like my body knew exactly what this was before my brain caught up. I pulled out my phone and texted Noah. Me. Are you up? I just got a security flag on the mentorship folder. Noah. Yep. On it. I didn't need to explain. She knew which file I meant. She also knew the importance of it. That spreadsheet contained projected distribution plans for the mentorship fund I'd quietly been developing for over a year. Targeted support for women in tech with no family support systems. Confidential donor info. Expansion roadmaps. Financial commitments. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Noah calling. Yeah? I said, already knowing it wasn't good. It came from a device labeled Avis MacBook Pro, she said. Same IP that pinged you before on that other shared folder 2 months ago. I closed my eyes. But it wasn't her login, was it? Nope, it was Lowell's. He didn't guess the password. He used a direct link, one that had already been authenticated. So she forwarded it to him, I murmured. There was a pause. Then Noah said what we both knew. This wasn't a breach, this was a handoff. I exhaled through my nose, slow and tight. Log everything. Already did. Want me to restrict future logins from all known Harper devices? Yes, lock it down, full restriction. I'll escalate from here. We ended the call, but the silence after felt like a vacuum, pulling every old memory into its center. I opened my sent mail, found the original email. It was dated 6 months ago. Subject line, thought you'd be proud of this. I had written, Hi Mom, just wanted to share what I've been working on. You always said I should do something that helps people. This mentorship fund is what I've built. Hope you're proud. Attached were the documents, the notes, and the private folder link. There was never a reply, not even a got it. And now, somehow, my younger brother Lowell, who once failed sophomore year for plagiarizing someone else's essay, had tried to open that exact file. I stared at the email thread for a long while. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop. Family, use, and tracking inside it, I created subfolders, forward logs, access records, legal prep, voice notes. I copied Noah's report into the appropriate folder. I added the original email, took a screenshot of the alert, labeled it all meticulously, time, date, source, device. I wasn't angry, not in the way they'd expect. I wasn't throwing my phone or sobbing into a pillow. I was charting, documenting, preserving. If they saw me as a vault to extract from, I'd become a vault that tracks the extraction. They always used my silence as proof of agreement. But silence isn't agreement. It's often just delay. Jonas texted me as I was labeling the last file. Still sleeping, you okay? Want coffee upstairs? I replied, Give me 20. I'm finishing something. He didn't ask what. I loved that about him. He respected boundaries that my own family never even noticed existed. I sat back, letting the last of the tea go cold. It was never about just the money. It was the assumption behind it, the entitlement to anything I created, the quiet belief that because I was capable, I must also be available, and because I was calm, I must be complicit. I looked out the window, the morning light bleeding through the gauzy curtains. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to be a folder someone could just open anymore. 3 days after the wedding, I found myself seated at Delphine's patio table under a cream umbrella with tassels that matched the napkins. The air smelled like sugared citrus and curated effort. She was hosting brunch for what she called the inner circle, a mix of influencers, local creatives, and whoever she wanted to impress this week. Jonas came with me, though I could tell he hated every second of it. I didn't blame him. The brunch wasn't about food or connection. It was a theater, and I was the unwilling centerpiece. Peach mimosas sparkled in vintage coupes, soft jazz drifted from a Bluetooth speaker, and everyone looked like they were waiting for something to happen. Delphine wore a flowing ivory jumpsuit, again suspiciously bridal. She moved around the table like a host on a lifestyle network. When she finally made it to my side, she handed me a gift, wrapped perfectly, down to the satin ribbon. This is just a little something, she said, her voice sing-song and loud enough for others to hear. Thought it might help with all that pressure you've been under. My stomach dipped. I untied the ribbon carefully. Inside was a hardcover book, pristine. Emotional Regulation for Difficult Women. I blinked once, then twice. A few people chuckled. One woman said, That's actually a great read. I saw it on Reese's list. Someone else murmured, "Bold choice," and bit into a croissant like it was none of their business, because to them, it wasn't. Delphine just smiled. Even Mom let out a light laugh. She's always been spirited. Maybe it'll give her some tools. I gripped the edges of the book like it might explode, and then I smiled. The kind of smile that's quiet and tight, the kind people mistake for graciousness. But Jonas knew. He reached under the table and touched my knee once, firmly. "Thanks," I said. My voice didn't shake. How thoughtful. The table moved on. The attention drifted. But I stayed seated inside that moment like it was a glass room. I used to believe composure was strength. I thought if I didn't flinch, I won. But that day I realized something else. Composure is just silence that learned how to dress. I carried that book home like it weighed nothing, but it stayed in my lap the entire drive. That evening, while Jonas took a call on the balcony, I opened Instagram. I don't know why, maybe instinct, maybe bad timing, but right at the top of my story's queue was Irina. She'd sent a message with just one line. "This is probably nothing, but you should see this." It was a screenshot of Delphine's private story, posted months ago. A black background with white text that read, "Ever tried helping someone mid-nervous breakdown over a Canva deck? Fun times." Followed by a crying laughing emoji. Below it, a few comments. "Girl, why do you always attract drama? You always get dragged into chaos, lol." The post had been liked by 2 mutual friends, one of whom had messaged me the week prior saying, "Your strength is inspiring. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't text Irina back. I just saved the screenshot and moved it into the same folder from earlier. Family use legal tracking. Subfolder, character evidence." Later that night, on our drive to a small rooftop dinner Jonas had arranged with some friends, I sat in silence. Not the kind that waits to be broken, but the kind that builds something inside. Jonas glanced over, one hand on the wheel, his voice soft. "You've been quiet since brunch." I nodded, then said, "Next time they try something like that, I won't hold back, not even a little." He was quiet for a second. "Are you sure?" I turned my head toward the windshield, eyes locked on the horizon. They've had enough chances. And just like that, something irreversible happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just a final switch. I didn't need their understanding anymore. I needed them to understand I was done asking. The morning sun didn't feel warm when I stepped onto the back patio of my parents' house. It was bright, yes, picturesque even. Everything about the setup screamed, "See? We're just a happy family." Florals spilled from vintage pitchers on every table. Ceramic plates were arranged with magazine-level symmetry. There was fresh squeezed juice in delicate carafes, and enough mason jars with pastel-striped straws to make a lifestyle blogger weep. Delphine was already seated, legs crossed, sunglasses too large for her face. She waved when she saw me. "You came! I thought you might still be mad." Her tone was light, teasing, like we were joking about a spilled drink, not a public humiliation. Lowell laughed. "Come on, it was just a gift. People need to chill." Jonas stood stiff beside me. He hadn't said much that morning. I think he was giving me space, or maybe waiting to see if I'd change my mind about coming. But I didn't. I needed to see if any of them would pretend this brunch didn't carry a crater beneath the table. Turns out they all could. We sat. Avis poured coffee into a pale blue cup that matched her blouse. Elwood, my father, reached for the fruit platter like he didn't have a single thought about what had gone down 4 days earlier. Small talk floated like pollen. "Delphine, how's the podcast launch?" "Oh, we hit 1,000 downloads already. People love the authenticity vibe." Lowell chimed in. "I've been digging into this new crypto. Total game changer." Avis smiled like she was soaking it all in, proud of her offspring's little empires. Not one word about the wedding, not the toast, not the frame, not even the fact that they gave a gift engraved with my shame. I glanced at Jonas. He was trying, he really was, to keep his mouth shut. But I saw it in the tight line of his jaw, the subtle tapping of his finger on the napkin. He cleared his throat. "I just want to say something, real quick." The table paused. "What happened at the wedding," Jonas said evenly, "wasn't okay." No one looked at him. No one looked at me either. Elwood reached for a bowl of cobbler. "Who wants more dessert, still warm?" Delphine laughed. Dad's priorities. Lowell smirked. Avis added cream to her coffee, and the moment passed like nothing had been said at all. Jonas set down his fork with an audible clink. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The message had been received and discarded. That was when I stood. The chair scraped against the patio bricks. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words cut sharper when they were still. You don't get to humiliate me and then pretend it didn't happen. Nobody moved. I looked at Delphine. You made a joke, right? A funny little jab? Then why hide your story from me afterward? She blinked, but said nothing. I turned to Avis. You laughed. You always laugh. And then you act like it's all love. That's not love, that's performance. Still no one spoke. Their silence was choreography now, refined and repeated. I scanned each face at the table, then landed on my father. And you? I asked. You've been silent so long I forgot what your voice sounds like when it isn't repeating a menu item. Elwood looked up. This is not the place. That's the problem, I said. It never is. That's how we keep getting here. I picked up the empty mimosa glass in front of me and placed it down, gently. This fake harmony? It's just more control. You want to bury the fire before anyone smells the smoke. Jonas rose beside me, not touching, just standing in alignment. I looked at each of them again. You've mistaken my silence for weakness. But here's the truth. Silence is your currency, not mine, and I'm broke. Delphine opened her mouth, probably to say something dismissive, something rehearsed, but I held up a finger. Next time, it won't be private. And then I walked out of the garden, not waiting for permission or apologies. Jonas followed a beat later. Behind me, I heard Elwood say, "Let her go. She'll cool off." They always said that. They never noticed I wasn't boiling anymore. I was done. The next evening, I was in my hotel room, the sky outside bruised with the last strokes of dusk. I'd kicked off my shoes, pulled my laptop onto my thighs, and was halfway through organizing the folder labeled Family Use Legal Tracking when my phone buzzed. A message from Kayla, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Hey, is this about you? No context, just a link. The thumbnail alone made my chest tighten. A podcast banner in soft beige tones with two hosts smiling like therapists who drank green juice for breakfast. The title? When Love Isn't Enough, Navigating Family with Narcissists. I clicked. There she was, Delphine, my sister. Her voice, all warmth and humility. You know, not every story has a clear villain. Sometimes people are just damaged, and they drag others into their chaos. The host murmured something about boundaries and empathy. Delphine continued, softer now. Some people make themselves so hard to love, and then call it loneliness. They don't realize the bridge burnt behind them wasn't sabotage. It was self-preservation. I sat completely still. She never said my name. She didn't have to. Anyone who knew us would know exactly who she meant. The recent wedding, the brunch, the quirky frame. It was all fresh in everyone's mind. I closed the podcast app, heart pounding, not with sadness, but with an icy sort of rage. By the time I opened Instagram, I already knew what I'd find. A carousel post from Delphine. The first photo, us as kids, sitting by a lake. The second, her crying into a tissue, perfectly lit. The third, a sunset over the beach house. Caption: Family wounds are the hardest. I tried to love her, even when she made it unbearable. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. The comments were already piling up. Wow, so raw. You're brave for speaking your truth. She sounds toxic AF. You deserve peace, girl. It was like watching my own reflection get erased in real time. And the worst part? They believed her. The curated sadness, the soft voice, the carefully chosen phrases like emotionally volatile and trying so hard. All of it woven into a story that made her the survivor and me the storm. I wasn't angry because she lied. I was angry because she lied so well. I minimized the window and reached for my laptop. The folder was still open, its title now feeling more prophetic than practical. Family Use Legal Tracking. I clicked into it, breathing slow. My fingers moved without hesitation. I opened the PDF with my financial contributions, the forwarded emails, the deck she'd used for the beach house, the spreadsheet Lowell accessed, attached each to a single email. Addressed it to a woman I knew from a tech equity panel last year, someone who'd once told me, "When you're ready to tell your story, tell it to someone who won't flinch." Subject: when the villain speaks first. Body: I'm done protecting the narrative. Here's mine. I clicked send. Then I leaned back and waited. An hour later, I posted one tweet. No hashtags, no threads, no drama, just, "Silence doesn't mean guilt. It means exhaustion. Receipts incoming." Within minutes, my notifications exploded. Retweets, DMs, mentions from people I didn't even know followed me. Jonas walked in from grabbing dinner, setting down a takeout bag from the Thai place down the street. He stopped mid-step when he saw my face. "You okay?" I tilted the laptop toward him so he could see the tweet. He blinked. "Did you just go live?" I nodded. "No more whispers. Let them hear me roar." He didn't say anything else, just came around the couch and sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. That was his way of saying he was with me. No speech, no strategy, just presence. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Marina. "Delphine's freaking out. Just saw your tweet. She's trying to get ahead of it." I almost smiled. For once, she wasn't 5 steps ahead. She was behind, panicked, reacting, and I wasn't afraid of her anymore. The Harper Foundation gala glittered like a snow globe shaken just for show. Glass walls, golden centerpieces, a string quartet playing jazz renditions of pop hits. I walked in with Jonas beside me, our steps aligned, our hands loose but close. Delphine was already at the mic. She wore a satin navy gown and her favorite expression, remorseful hero. Her voice, velvet-wrapped, floated through the crowd. "Healing," she said, "starts with telling the truth, even when it's hard, even when it paints you in an unflattering light." The audience clapped, polite, detached. I scanned the room, women in heels balancing tiny hors d'oeuvres, men sipping bourbon and glancing at their phones. My tweet was still trending. Screens lit up around us like fireflies. They'd seen it. They knew. And she knew I was here. Jonas leaned in. "Ready?" I nodded. "Let's find our seats. This should be interesting." We passed a cluster of community leaders and sponsors. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact. Delphine caught sight of us and smiled like nothing had happened, that same damn smile she wore when she gave me the frame. The host announced, "Up next, we're honored to welcome Marcy Harper to speak on women's leadership and resilience." As I stepped forward, my mother leaned toward me. "Keep it classy," she whispered. "You've said enough already." I turned slightly. "Have I?" The mic felt colder than I expected. I wrapped my fingers around it, grounding myself. "Thank you," I began, scanning the room. "Tonight's about women who lead, and what they overcome to do it." I paused. I used to believe silence was strength, that enduring pain without protest was noble, but I've learned silence is also how harm survives. A murmur swept through the crowd. Phones lifted. Some started recording. "I won't waste your time with vague empowerment phrases. I'm going to be direct." I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some judgmental, some hopeful. 2 weeks ago, I was publicly mocked at my own wedding. A gift, engraved with biggest disappointment, was presented to me by my family. Delphine's face froze. "I've been called difficult, emotional, dramatic. These are the tools people use to discredit women who won't stay quiet." Someone in the back gasped audibly. My sister recorded a podcast about a narcissistic sibling. She never said my name but didn't have to, then posted a carousel of curated sympathy, painting herself as the victim. Delphine took a step forward. "Marcy." Jonas stood. His voice was calm, firm. "Let her speak. You've had your turn." The room went silent. My mother motioned to the host, whispering something behind her hand. I didn't care. "I've got receipts," I continued. "Financial records showing misuse of funds I gave in good faith. Screenshots of my private files accessed without permission. Comments made about my mental health. Mocked, shared, laughed at." I inhaled, let it settle. "And I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because women like me, like some of you, are told to keep it quiet, to preserve the family name, to smile through sabotage." I looked at my mother, then my sister. Neither blinked. "Well," I said, "I don't do quiet anymore." The room held its breath. Family doesn't mean immunity. Not anymore. I handed the mic back to the host and walked off stage. Jonas met me halfway, hand outstretched. Not to pull me, just to meet me. The applause started as a whisper, then grew louder. Some clapped out of shock. Others, because they knew. Delphine turned and walked out, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on marble. Avis sat stone still. Elwood adjusted his cufflinks. The show was over, but I wasn't acting anymore. They always expected me to break. I did, just not the way they hoped. 3 days after the gala, I sat at my kitchen island in Atlanta, barefoot, hair tied back, sipping from a chipped mug that still read Best Daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it was the biggest cup I had, and this morning, I needed more caffeine than sentiment. My inbox was flooded, subject lines blinking like tiny sirens. Brand terminates partnership with Delphine Harper. Podcast host releases statement, ethical concerns, influencer backlash, family isn't a PR campaign. No phone call, no apology, just digital vanishing acts. Delphine had gone quiet. Posts archived, comments off, stories deleted. Avis hadn't been tagged in any family photo roundups this week. Even distant cousins started unfollowing. They didn't apologize. They disconnected. Which, honestly, was the most honest thing they'd done in years. Jonas walked in from the bedroom holding his tablet. He looked well rested. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours in 2 days. He set the tablet down. Noah sent the full log file. Everything's timestamped and clean. I turned the screen toward me. There it was, the IP trail, the access attempts, the forwarded links, the name Lowell Harper attached to the login. Same device ID as Avis's MacBook. The same link I sent her 10 months ago. I had built something good. My own company, my mentorship deck, my design plans, and they'd passed them around like party favors. Jonas clicked into a folder labeled Legal, where Noah had uploaded her report. You ready to file? I didn't flinch. Yes. We submitted the digital privacy breach with the appropriate agency. It was surgical, quiet, but not invisible. No threats, no grandstanding, just facts. That night, I opened my shared drive and started purging. First, I revoked access for Avis, Lowell, and even the old email Delphine had once begged me to just include, in case she ever wanted to support my work. I removed them from archived projects, financial access points, and advisory boards. They wouldn't be borrowing my light again. Not to warm themselves or to shine on their narratives. I deleted the old Harper family share drive and replaced it with a clean version labeled Forward Only. Then I pulled up my company's leadership page and edited my bio. Removed any reference to Daughter of Local Philanthropists. That title had expired. Late into the night, while Jonas read beside me, I drafted a post. Not a takedown, a boundary. I titled it, This Isn't About Revenge, It's About Recovery. I uploaded redacted screenshots, blurred names, intact timelines. I wrote, Sometimes what looks like silence is really just survival. I didn't go public to punish anyone. I spoke up because protecting your dignity should never feel like betrayal. I attached the screenshot of Delphine's mocking, nervous breakdown post and added, This is what erasure looks like, dressed in likes and filters. I posted it to Medium and linked it on my professional page. Then I shut my laptop. The post went viral overnight. Not celebrity viral, real viral. People, women especially, messaged me. Thank you for this. I thought I was the only one whose family weaponized silence. This helped me walk away. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like oxygen. The next morning, I walked into my studio and lit a candle by the window. Not a ritual, a reminder. I hadn't burned the house down. I just stopped letting it trap me. It had been 2 quiet weeks since the gala. Not silent, just still. The kind of stillness that settles in after everything breaks loose. Like the hush after a thunderstorm, when the sky stops cracking open and just hangs, gray but calm. The leaves barely move. The puddles mirror a sky that seems unsure of how to begin again. That morning, I woke up to the soft patter of spring rain on my windows in Atlanta. Light, rhythmic, cleansing. The kind of rain that doesn't demand attention, but invites reflection. I didn't mind it. I brewed my coffee slowly, letting the ritual pull me into the present. No rush, no urgency, just me, the soft sound of the rain, and the hum of a city that hadn't yet opened its eyes. I settled at my desk, pulled my robe tighter around me, opened my laptop, and began scrolling through emails. Most were the usual clutter: newsletters, invoices, a few messages from mentees. And then I saw her name. Subject line, still family. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it, heart suddenly tight in my chest. The cursor hovered, waiting on me. The steam from my mug curled upward, wrapping itself around the silence like it wanted to hold the moment with me. I sat like that for a while. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 20 minutes. Long enough for the coffee to cool slightly. Eventually, I clicked. I've always loved you, even when you couldn't see it. You misunderstood. You're still my sister. We're still family. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, I shouldn't have said that. No real ownership. Just a revisionist attempt at closure, crafted to look like compassion. A passive reach, positioned like grace, but laced with implication. Like she was the one forgiving, while I was the one refusing to be forgiven. It read like someone trying to end a chapter without admitting they burned the pages. I didn't reply. Didn't forward it to Jonas, even though I knew he'd want to see it. Didn't screenshot it. Didn't rage text anyone. Didn't even delete it. I just marked it unread, then archived it. That was my response. My version of a boundary. Quiet, final, intentional. Outside, the rain didn't let up. I stayed in, lit the candle I'd started lighting every morning after the gala. A new habit, or maybe a ritual. Not to remember, but to recenter. Not nostalgia. Just a small flame that helped me feel grounded. I logged into the back end of the mentorship platform I'd built. The one they once laughed at, diminished in those sharp, fake smile ways. The one they told me was too niche, too idealistic. Now it was growing, not viral, not explosive, but steady, real. There were new donations, small ones, $10 here, $25 there. Alongside them, short messages that landed louder than any check. Keep going. Wish I had this in my 20s. You're building something real. I stared at the screen for a while, then clicked into the Programs tab. I created a new initiative. Rebuild for women recovering from family emotional manipulation. No press release, no Instagram post with a quote card, no announcement, just a simple description and an open door. Around lunchtime, I stretched out on the couch, phone face down on the coffee table. No sound, no notifications. I hadn't opened Instagram in days. Didn't care what Delphine had posted or deleted. Whether Avis was still trying to position herself as the center of everyone's brunch plans. Let them talk. Let them defend whatever fiction they'd spun. I was out of the game. Then my phone buzzed, just once. A message. No subject line. Just a single sentence. Because of your story, I packed a bag and left my mother's house last night. Thank you for reminding me I'm not crazy. I exhaled. Not the kind of exhale that's dramatic or performative. The kind that sneaks out of you without a sound, but lifts weight you didn't know you were still carrying. I leaned my head back. Tears didn't fall, but they brimmed. Not from sadness, from something cleaner, something closer to recognition. That kind of moment where you remember why you started. Impact doesn't always show up in headlines or follower counts. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet bravery of one woman finding a door she thought was locked, only to realize it had always been open, just never visible. The next morning, the rain had stopped. I got dressed in a hoodie, pulled my hair into a knot, and walked to the cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. No makeup, no earbuds. Just me in my body, feeling present for once. The barista greeted me by name. I smiled, genuinely. Said good morning without rushing. I didn't check Twitter. Didn't open my analytics dashboard. I ordered my usual, grabbed a seat by the window, and pulled out my journal. I wrote, "You don't need an apology to heal. You need truth. You need boundaries. And the courage to walk away, even when they call it betrayal. Especially then." I closed the journal and slid it back into my bag. Outside, the sidewalk still shimmered with yesterday's rain, but the clouds had started to lift. The light was different. Not bright, but clearing. A beginning, maybe. They might still tell their version of me, but I'm not listening anymore. Some stories don't end with apologies. Some don't come full circle. But healing isn't about closure. It's about clarity. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt like your family sees you as the problem for simply having boundaries, if you've been told you're too sensitive, too much, or just hard to love because you refuse to keep playing a role that hurt you, I want you to know this. You are not alone, and you are not wrong for walking away to protect your peace. I used to think love meant tolerance, that forgiveness required forgetting, but peace, I've learned, doesn't beg for proof. It doesn't need everyone to understand. It just needs you to understand your worth. You don't have to burn bridges, but you're allowed to stop setting yourself on fire to keep them warm. And maybe your story isn't this one. Maybe your wound looks different, but if it still aches, you're still healing, and healing is still happening. So here's my question to you. What would you say to the younger version of yourself, still trying to please people who never tried to understand her? Leave a comment and tell me. Or just drop a if this resonated. Type 1 if you've been there, or let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this story touched something in you, please consider subscribing. We share real stories for real people with real heart. And if this helped you even a little, I hope you'll be here for the next one. Until then, be safe, be loud, and most importantly, be free.